Hello and welcome to another segment of DSU Inside Perspective. I'm Carlos Holmes, and this is the show in which we talk with faculty, staff, students, alumni, and guests from the outside about some of the things that are going on in this world and some of the great things that are going on at Delaware State University. Today, we're talking about both. We're talking about things that are going on in the world and this wonderful guest that we have here today at Delaware State University. I'm so pleased to have Dr. Eddy Maloka here. Dr. Eddy Maloka is the CEO of the African Peer Review Mechanism, and he's going to tell us all about what that is, okay? It's all about Africa, right?
Thank you very much, yeah.
What is the peer review mechanism?
Look, the peer review, the African peer review mechanism, you could say is three things. One is a multilateral organization. So it's a group of African countries that want to work together around the governance agenda on the African continent. The second thing, it's a specialized agency of the African Union. So it works within the African Union. So it's an institution that belongs to the African Union. And then thirdly, it's more like a rating agency. It's more like a governance rating agency, but we use a different methodology. We send teams. Those teams, they look at governance in that country's political governance, economic governance, the 4 areas we focus on, and then they do reports on those countries, and those reports then become public document that then the leaders respond to the findings in those reports.
You look at all the things that make a country go.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, my last count, there were about 54 sovereign African countries. That's about correct now.
Yeah.
How many of those countries are part of the African peer review mechanism?
No, 37 now. 37.
37.
Yeah. We're working towards a full universal accession of all of, but it's voluntary, so it's not automatic.
But these are all countries that their government entities have had the humility to look at themselves, to examine themselves, and then to open themselves up to constructive criticism.
Yes,
Is that the best way to explain?
Exactly. The way we do it, we say we are not external, we are African. So and then the countries assess themselves. It's more like where the countries write their own reports, and then we send teams to validate their own reports. And then the way we structure our own reports, we look at what is good that this country can share with other countries, and then also what are the challenges that we have picked up, and then the country will say, with these challenges, this is how we want to address them. And then out of those challenges, they develop what is called the National Plan of Action.
So you're talking about some of the largest countries, population-wise, like Nigeria, or some of the small countries and everything in between.
Well, of course, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, the big countries are members, of course, and you do have countries like Equatorial Guinea also, which are relatively small in population size, yeah.
Has this caused changes to take place in the countries? Has it caused them to make changes to the way they govern themselves?
Look, there are two things. One is that it's sovereign. So it's voluntary and sovereign. So a country does this, goes into this process, works with us, and their recommendations. So overall, the countries, they take those reviews very seriously because they are at the level of the president. So no president wants that, I've got these problems. So you do have cases where countries have really, in some cases, amended their constitution, introduced new institutional measures like cabinets, committees of the state or structures of the state. Sometimes, like, for example, they can deal with the issues of quotas. But there have also been many instances where the recommendations were not taken on board, and some of them actually turn out to realize something you didn't want it to happen in your own country. So there is an early warning potential in our reports, and some countries take advantage of us, but some don't, and then things happen, unfortunately, and then you look back and say, but this was in the PRM report, why didn't we do anything about this? So there is a mixture, but generally it's quite positive, the way countries take those reports very seriously. Okay.
Now this is a creation of the African Union. There are 5 regions of the African Union, East, West, North, South, and Central. And that's all the countries that comprise those areas. But the African Union now recognizes a 6th region. What is that 6th region?
Well, I was saying that in the African Union, there is this drive to recognize the people of African diaspora as the 6th region.
I'm not going to assume that people understand what African diaspora is. What is that?
Well, we say that people of African descent, wherever they are, all over the world, they all come from the African continent, so they constitute our diaspora. Many of them were taken away from the continent as slaves. Others left as professionals to go and work. So they constitute an African diaspora community.
So in this country, that includes the African Americans?
The African Americans, indeed. They are considered part of... on the African continent, we consider them as part of the African people, and there is a process and there are even structures in the African Union to reach out to the African diaspora.
To establish or to recognize a sixth reason, the people of African descent that live elsewhere, is this symbolic or is there a real meaning behind this?
It's both. It's both in that it's an acknowledgement that African people, we share the common history, we have suffered together, and we are the same people, and we share a common destiny. So we must work together towards this towards this destiny. But at a practical level, like for example in the Caribbean, they've been quite an effort for the African Union and the CARICOM, the Community of the Caribbean States, to try to have some sort of partnership. I've been to meetings where there was a CARICOM representation. We have had formal engagement between the African Union and the CARICOM. We had one in Jamaica and so on and so on. But where, like in the case of North America, where you have a very strong African American population, but they are not state actor. So they are related with the African Union through a body in the African Union which we call the ECOSOC, the Economic, but it's an organ of the African Union to accommodate the participation of the non-state African diasporic communities in the affairs of the African Union. And I was part of this formation of that body, and we even worked out a formula on how the African American and the diaspora, African diaspora community can be represented and participate. They meet, they have their General Assembly, they elect the leadership. So you do have African Americans who are active in those structures. I've worked with some of them.
Now, African Americans in this country, they need your help, okay?
Yeah.
We need your help right now because when we turn on our cable news, we see very little about Africa. It's all about, right now, it's all about Donald Trump. Porn star Donald Trump, the Russian investigation and Donald Trump, this, that, and the other, and Donald Trump, and all the chaos that's going on with that. How do we become more educated in terms of what is going on in the mother country of Africa?
I think, we have an advantage that unlike in the 19th century or even in the 20th century, now we've got platform technologies. One of the students today when the discussion about the same subject was even saying, why don't we create a platform that connects African institutions and African American institutions, students, the private sector. We can have equivalents of a Facebook type, or a social platform where we are able to exchange information. But we are working now with Delaware State University now to see what is it concretely that the university community can do on the African continent to work with us. But to try to challenge the big media house is not going to be easy. Even on the African continent, we don't have our own. We do have regional media houses and so on, but we see even on the continent struggle globally to try to have a very strong African voice in the media-wise. So it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge. It's a question of resources, but there are ways that we can deal with it. And I think that creating a platform, linking up institutions, people to people, it can compensate for some of these challenges that you have picked up.
Just earlier this morning, you spoke before an audience of African American students, largely here at Delaware State University. What is it you're communicating to the students here in terms of the possibilities for them to connect with Africa in the future after they get their degrees, and even now as they are students here? How can they become more engaged with the affairs of Africa?
I think at two levels. One is that you have to liberate yourself mentally, to come to accept and recognize that Africa is moving, things are happening. So if you are stuck in the Afro-pessimistic mode, you will not see opportunities. You will see a dark continent, you will see darkness. So that's the first thing. We need to get our students out to see that Africans are doing something on the African continent. And then the second thing, that's when you say, what role can I play? As a student, you can come as an intern, you can come and participate. A lot of countries do send their interns to African institutions, to African countries. So it's an opportunity. And then you've got the intellectual capital to share with us. You've got a lot of experience. So what I'm trying to say is that the first thing is to liberate yourself mentally, to recognize that Africa is a thing, and that's where we must work. And to say yourself, you've got some connection to this continent and with this continent, and then try to identify through your own institution. So that's what I'm here for, working with the university to see what are the concrete things that we can do with the university community to partner with the continental processes, and then also the continental institutions. And I think the internships and the knowledge sharing, and these are some of the opportunities that exist out there that we can explore, and we should be exploring, and we are working on some of the concrete projects in that regard.
Many of us have grown up hearing stories of the former African greatness back many, 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 many years ago, before the colonists came in, before they pilfered the country, before they took people out of there as slaves. Today we have this movie called The Black Panther. And it kind of stimulates a certain pride in Africa and the greatness of Africa. It sounds like to me the African Union believes that that greatness, Africa can be restored to that greatness.
My brother, I can tell you that the foundation thought for African modern political idea is the reawakening, the resurgence, the renaissance of Africa. It's an idea that cuts across time, since slavery, since colonialism, for Africans to say, we must look up to that day when we should be able to claim our, and this is the time to do it. I think that we have liberated ourselves. Now we must take the destiny into our hands, and that's what we are trying to do on the African continent, on some of the areas that I discussed with the students earlier today.
Dr. Eddy Maloka, this has been a privilege and an honor for me to have you on the show today. And if you step back through this way at Delaware State University, I expect you to come back on the show.
You'll see me very soon. And happy birthday, by the way. I'm not going to ask you how old you are, but I know that you are young enough and you are so energized. And keep up the good work. And thank you very much for having me on your program.
I am 60 and I'm blessed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being on the show. And thank you so much for joining us for another episode of DSU Inside Perspective. Everybody have a good day.